Hello, everybody. I'm Derek Arden, and welcome to Monday Night Live. Today, I've got an old friend of mine, Alan Stevens, on. Alan and I were both presidents of the Professional Speaking Association in the UK. And interestingly enough, I first met Alan in Melbourne, Australia, at the National Speakers Conference of Australia. And we've been sparring partners and all sorts of things. Alan's done a lot of good work for charities, and it's an absolute pleasure to have you on, Alan. Thanks very
Thank you.
much for joining us. Alan, give us a quick snapshot of your career so far.
Depends which career you want me to talk about,
Well, I
Derek.
want to talk about all
I
of them,
will.
Alan.
I'll try and run through it as quickly as I can. So I actually started out in teaching many years ago, back in the 70s, but didn't do that for long, just for about 5 years. And then I got into working for an organisation called Which Magazine, Consumers Association, which some people know in the States. It'll be Consumer Reports. It'll be Test Achat in France, Consumer Bond in Germany. But basically, I was a consumer journalist for many years. So I was doing things like secret shopping, going to pretending to be somebody who needed his car fixed, and then sort of checking up on the garages and doing that, all that sort of stuff, and then going on TV and radio and talking about it. I did that for about 20 years, and then what I did was I moved. I had a sudden sideways shift as a result of something that happened at Which, and I set up my own company over 25 years ago to manage people's reputations. So I'm a spin doctor, really. I manage people's reputations. I'm also a professional speaker. As you say, Derek, we were both presidents of the Professional Speaking Association. I was president of the Global Federation. I can actually say I was president of the world of my own association for a little while. But now I'm just sort of having fun, still coaching people, still coaching speakers. Quite a few I've got on my roster. Doing a little bit of speaking, but not too much. I'm mostly enjoying myself with music. You can see some music pictures behind me. A lot of these are people I've worked with over the years. I started out as a music MC. My first gig on stage was 60 years ago, believe it or not, when I was 12 years old, and I was MC of my grandfather's music club in southwest London. And the second band I introduced on stage was the Rolling Stones. So there you go.
Wow.
So I go back a long way with these guys, which is why I've got their picture on my wall. So I'm
So,
big into volunteering and big into saying they shouldn't be doing that when I see somebody who's messing their reputation up.
Alan, you don't look as old as Mick Jagger or Keith Richards. Have you've got,
Actually, the Zoom filters are fantastic, Derek. Believe me,
I
they're
thought you
fantastic.
had a lot of makeup on there.
Well, that as
So,
well.
let's talk about Which for a minute, because
Mm.
I see that as an investigative journalist.
Yes.
What's the most interesting assignment you got working for Which magazine?
Probably one of the most interesting ones. I used to be, well, I still am, actually. Don't tell anybody, an inspector for the Good Food Guide, because we used to produce that as well. So I used to go into restaurants, not secretly, and I'd go in quite openly, but they didn't know I was a food inspector. They still don't. And we used to have two rules as food inspectors that you never go anywhere where there's a picture of food on the menu. And as soon as you hear the ping of a microwave, you run out of the restaurant as quickly as you can. And I've abided by those rules ever since. Oh, there is one more rule, and that is if you ever send food back, you never eat any more food in that restaurant.
Well, I won't
Believe me,
ask
I
you
know what
why the
happens behind
third.
the
I won't
scenes.
ask you about the third one, but
Off you go.
why not? Why no picture on it? Because surely a picture says 1,000 words.
Well, no, it's just what we found over the years. Looking at restaurants, if they put a picture of the food on the menu, it never looks like that when it arrives. It's an artist's impression of whatever the food was supposed to be, and it's just misleading. Oh, the other thing is they've got long flowery descriptions of what's on the menu. Sort of dew gathered mushrooms put in a wicker basket at dawn and lightly sautéed with several herbs and spices. Just forget it. Walk away.
Wow, interesting. Now, as an investigator or an
Mhm.
inspector or whatever you call yourself, you must have gone into some pretty aggressive situations if they found out who you were, or did you
Oh
always
yeah, yeah,
undercover?
yeah. It did happen. I had some incidents where I was investigating garages. We were doing garage mechanics. So what we'd done, we'd set up a car with certain marks in almost, well, invisible marks. Actually, you can only see them under UV to check whether they'd actually done everything, to see whether they'd looked at the brakes and checked the spark plugs and done the oil and all that sort of thing. And then I would take them into garages as a punter, and then they would do or not do what they were supposed to have done, and then we would write a report about them. And this one garage that I went into, they actually went over the engine with a UV light and found the marks.
Oh, ho, ho,
Uh,
ho.
and when I went back in to pick the car up, they were really not in a good mood. They said, "You're testing us, aren't you? You're an inspector, aren't you?" And I had to say, "Well, yeah, kind of, yeah." And in the end, we left the car there and made a hasty exit. So
Oh, wow.
unfortunately, we had to write that one off. Several £1,000s worth of cars still in that garage, as far as I know.
Oh, you didn't send someone back to get it?
No, no.
Oh, wow.
It was
Oh,
in the East End of London where I now live, and I know better than to upset people in the East End of London. Believe me, Derek.
yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. So moving on to what you do now. So you
Mm.
advise people on social media.
Yeah,
You're known as the media coach.
yeah.
There's been some real mess ups recently in in the media. I was just thinking, really, Prince Andrew to Greg Wallace.
Well, there's yeah, no, yeah. Every week something comes up, so I've always got jobs to do because I often get a phone call from people to say, "Can I'm in trouble? What do I say?" And quite often I'll give them some advice. I'll charge them actually for some advice. But sometimes I'll say, "Well, you've gone too far." I mean, one of the ones you mentioned there, and some people will know of this chap, Greg Wallace. Other people won't. But he's a presenter, was a presenter of a food program on television, and made some very inappropriate remarks. And allegedly, I should say, this is being recorded, isn't it? He allegedly made some very inappropriate remarks, lost his job as a result, and then made it even worse with some remarks that he made to try and justify what he said in the first place. So that was an astonishingly bad thing to do.
He actually did a video, didn't he, which he
Mm.
posted on Instagram on a
Yes,
Sunday
yes, he
morning.
did. I'll tell you what he said because it's public knowledge. So he was accused. He has been accused of being sexually inappropriate, both in terms of touching and words that he'd used. And he did a little video which he put out on social media to say, "I don't know what all the fuss is about. All the allegations against me are from middle class, middle-aged women, and you know what they're like." Um, I don't know what possessed him to to say that. Um, but it was a huge error, as you know, a huge error, which he's now backtracked on very quickly. And he said he got confused, but his apology for an excuse hasn't worked. So he's now done the right thing and disappeared. Because the one thing I always say to people is, firstly, come out with your hands up, make an apology, and then lie low for as long as possible until we can find a way back.
And what about Prince Andrew?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think I can probably forget the knighthood these days, so I can say what I want about that. But again, it's really a case of coming out and saying everything that you know about something, making yourself the center of attention. So what he should have, if I'd have been advising the guy, what I would have said is, come out and say everything that you've done. Come out and tell us what happened. Put your hands up, apologize, say, I'm sorry for that. It won't happen again, but this is what I did. And then all the speculation goes away
Mm.
because you control the agenda. And it's always about saying sorry, control the agenda, make yourself the center of information, and then, as I say, lie low for a while, and then you can sort of sneak back out eventually.
But of course, Prince Andrew couldn't do that, could he, really? Because,
Well, no, he couldn't because of the pressures from the royal family, but it's what you should have done.
yeah. Yeah, no, I was just thinking he was probably guilty, wasn't he? Although I'm not supposed to speculate on
Well,
things
we're
like
not.
that on the being.
I couldn't possibly comment.
No, of course you couldn't because
No.
you're a reporter. I wouldn't expect you to at
But
all.
the one thing I would say, I mean, the absolute maxim, it's really, really important, is that when I get contacted by people and they say, I'm in trouble, I need to try and get away with this. And I say, well, there's one thing you can never do, and that is to lie. And I won't help you to lie. And hello, Fripp, nice to see you down there. How are you? But one thing that sometimes people say to me, said, look, one guy offered me a lot of money to make up some lies on his behalf, and of course I turned it down. And he said to me, well, don't worry, I don't worry if my reputation is affected. And I said, I don't care about your reputation, it's mine I'm concerned about.
Mm,
If
absolutely.
I ever took your money to help you to lie about something, I'd never get another job. So I told him to go away.
So Jermaine Genius was a footballer who used to be on the One Show, used to be on the
That's right.
One Show, and
Yes.
he did some pretty sort of just sending someone some texts, and he's disappeared totally off the screens. Did he? He's done the right thing, has he? You
Yeah,
should.
he's done the right thing. And for people who don't know, yes, he was a presenter on an early evening kind of family show. And what he did apparently was to send people pictures of a part of his body that you shouldn't really send people pictures of.
Oh,
And that's not a good thing to do. Got caught out, and as a result, left the program. And as you rightly say, Derek, he is lay very low,
mm.
and that is absolutely the right thing to do. I always say to people, lay low for a while, and then perform some kind of good thing. Do a good deed. Perform some act of charity. Go and work for homeless people somewhere, or do something good to show what a nice person you are, and then don't get involved at all in any of this nonsense ever again.
Well, that's interesting. You obviously did a good job there because I didn't know. I thought it was just inappropriate text rather than inappropriate pictures. So obviously he got advice from someone like you to lie low at that point, and rather than making any other statements like Greg Wallace did. Of course, he issued an apologetic video three hours later, which you
Yeah,
know,
well, I
rubbed
can't
salt
say who
into the
my
wound.
clients are, obviously. Well, I can say who some of my clients are, because I know you're going to ask me a question where I'm going to tell you what the worst incident I ever had was. But most of my clients, I can't tell who they are because I keep them out of the newspapers.
Of course you do. Of
You
course.
remember, sorry, I think some of the people here might remember newspapers. They were big folded things with printing on. They were great. I used to love them.
Well, I remember asking you once, very naively, why did newspapers always print bad news? And I think you said that's what newspapers are for.
It is what newspapers are for. No, no. I mean, no, we love good news. Of course, we love good news. There is. That's not quite true. There is good news in the papers. It's not always bad. Um, but if it bleeds, it leads. That's the phrase as journalists we use. If it bleeds, it leads. And therefore, if you've got something that happens, something catastrophic or some scandal, of course it's going to lead. Of course, it's going to be above the fold. Of course.
Why is the BBC worse than ITV and Sky? And for our American friends, that's basically the three news channels that we look at. I just curious why they always seem to be emotionally worse when they're owned by us.
I'm sorry. That's a leading question, my lord, and I'm going to object to that.
I don't blame you actually, because they won't
I'm not
be.
going to accept that because I've worked at the BBC. I've worked at BBC and Sky,
Yeah.
and I love the BBC, so I'm not going to have that.
Well, the deal was Alan should put me in my place if I asked an inappropriate question. So I have. So I'll take that as a slap. Winding the tape back, Alan, about 2 minutes. You said I was going to ask you another question about the most difficult situation you've been in. Tell us what that was.
Yes, I will, and I can talk about it publicly now because it is public knowledge. And just to give you a bit of background, um, there was actually Frit will like this because it was a Good Friday and it was a phone call I never wanted to receive. It was about 9 o'clock in the morning. It's a lovely opening to a speech, um, but but it was a call from the general manager of the Beverly Hills Hotel. And what he said was, he said, Alan, we've got a bit of a problem because we've got a demonstration outside the hotel, outside the drive of the Beverly Hills Hotel. There's Jay Leno, Sharon Osbourne are out there, and they're holding up placards saying, boycott the Beverly Hills Hotel. Don't come in. And he said, our guests are not coming in. He said, so we haven't had any guests come in all morning. And I said, so what's the problem? And he said, well, as you probably know, we've been taken over by the Sultan of Brunei. Now, the Sultan of Brunei, third richest man in the world, probably owns the Beverly Hills Hotel through 16 holding companies. He's no idea he owns it. But nevertheless, he did at the time. And the Sultan of Brunei was about to bring in a law that said gay and lesbian people in Brunei should be stoned to death. Obviously, that's not right. It's an appalling thing to do. And as a result, the Hollywood glitterati had decided to boycott the hotel which he owned. But actually, the Bel Air as well is owned by the Sultan of Brunei. It's the same group, Dorchester Group. So they boycotted both hotels, and they wouldn't let anybody in. And I got this call saying we got CNN, Fox News arriving in half an hour. Alan, you work for us as our crisis manager. What are we going to say? So that was the toughest thing I came across. You see what I did there? I left that hanging because I know you're going to ask me another question. Yeah.
Well, you didn't tell us what it was.
Oh,
That's a nested loop, isn't it? Or something like that in psychology.
it's actually leading the interviewer is
Okay.
what I'm doing there. I led you into saying, so Alan, what did you do? I'll tell you, Derek, since you were about to ask.
Thank you, Alan.
Um, so what what I did was I stopped and thought about it for a moment. I had about 20 minutes to think what to do. So I came up with three responses. The first one was I said it's a government to government issue. That if a head of state is about to enact a piece of legislation, then the people to persuade him otherwise, are not the manager of a hotel and his staff. They're actually the person sitting in the White House. So I said, you should actually be picketing the White House, not the Beverly Hills Hotel. So that was the first point I made. Second point was that many of the workers in hotels are LGBTQ plus people. 30% plus in the Beverly Hills were going to be people who would be annoyed about this as well, and they would lose their livelihoods as a result of a boycott of the hotel. And therefore, you're damaging people in America who would be obviously very annoyed by the legislation. So you're hurting the people you're claiming to protect. And the third thing was, as I said at the start, the Sultan of Brunei doesn't even know he owns the Beverly Hills Hotel. It's small change as far as he's concerned, and if it closed for forever, he wouldn't care. So it's not even putting any pressure on him. So I said, say those three things to the press and see how it goes. And that's what he did. But the boycott itself, the boycott lasted for 5 years
Wow.
before they got back to full operation again. It was a really tough one, and I spent a lot of time, a lot of late nights rebutting things that had been said in the press and so on. It was a really really tough one. Worst case I've had to deal with, but it's over now.
And you talked when we rehearsed this and we had a chat about David Letterman for our American friends,
Yes,
the story
yes.
about him.
I think people, yeah, certainly people in America will remember the Letterman case where he was being blackmailed by somebody because he had actually had affairs with people on his show. So that was true. And I think what he did brilliantly was to come out on his show, tell the story, admit what he'd done, apologize for having done it, and say that he'd now notified the police about the fact that he was being blackmailed. Really brilliant, brilliant thing to do. Very brave, but also very wise. And the Letterman case, I think, is actually a case study in crisis management now because he did it in such a brilliant manner. He just came out, he admitted it, and he said, "I've done it. I'm sorry. I've let my family down. I've let everybody down, but I'm not being blackmailed over this." And the guy's now in prison. The blackmailer's in prison.
And then we had the famous case over here of Gerald Ratner, who made one
Yes,
statement at a dinner, I think, which was
he
being
did.
videoed about his own company, and there was
It
nothing he
wasn't
could do
Derek.
about
It wasn't a dinner. It was a speech.
it. It was a speech.
He was making a presentation to a couple of thousand people. And he produced a cut glass decanter and six glasses on a silver tray and held it up. I'm going to use a slightly rude word. I hope I can say it. It's verbatim, so I know I'm allowed to say it. And he said, "This is crap." He said, "We buy this for about £10 from China and we sell it for 75. Aren't we clever?" And you know what happened. People in the UK will know what happened. That within 18 months, all of his stores, and he was a big presence on the high street, all of his stores had closed. His business disappeared. Not quite overnight, but over 18 months as a result of one ridiculous statement. I mean,
I
he
think,
was right. They were buying it for 10 and selling it for 75, but you shouldn't tell people that, should you?
well, he shouldn't call it crap. I think that was
No, no, I think that was the real
probably,
error. Yeah,
probably the worst thing he did, didn't he? With
yeah.
all those people with engagement rings on and issues like that. That was an extraordinary. I think his business did disappear a lot.
His business did disappear, but now, believe it or not, he's one of the best paid speakers on the circuit because he
Is it
goes out and
really?
tells that story
Well,
and how he
that's
recovered from it. And he did recover from it. Yeah, fair play to the guy.
so. What happens when you get called up by Sky or CNN or something, and they want to speak to you? What's the actual process, or they want you on TV?
Well, the process is always very short term, which is why I am a news junkie. I'm all over the news. I'm on the news I listen to it in the morning. I listen to it midday. I listen to it again in the evening because I need to know what's happening. Because what happens is you'll get a call or a text from Sky or say CNN or sometimes Fox or GB News over here these days, and they'll say, "Alan, do you know all about this story?" I always say yes, even if I've never heard of it. I always say yes. Give me a minute. Just got to put the cat out or something. So then I make sure I'm up to speed with the story, which I usually am. And then they're going to say, "Well, what's your view on this?" And give us a couple of quotes. So I give them a couple of sound bites and they say, "Great, can you come into the studio at 6 a.m. tomorrow or 7 a.m. tomorrow or whatever time it is and just say that on air?" And that's what I do. It's the easiest part of the job, to be honest, Derek. Really is.
What's the relevance of the sound bites? Is that to get the producer
Well,
on
so
side?
because they want to know, for example, they want to know what I'm going to say. So they want to have a good idea because sometimes they want a pro and a con. So sometimes they want two different views so that we can have a bit of a debate on air. So that when I get to the breakfast studio, I find that there's somebody with an opposing view, which is fine. I like a debate. We all like a debate, don't we? So yeah, they want to make sure I've got one view and somebody else has got the other one.
Wow. Okay. Well, Alan, we're nearly at the end of the presentation,
Really, that went quick.
the interview. Yeah, there's one or two questions in the chat box I'm going to ask you. Number one is, has Prince Harry contacted people in your profession to try and fix his predicament?
Yes.
I thought that'd be your answer, but I thought I would put the
What was the next question in the chat box, Derek?
well, I'm Gerald
I
Rapp.
don't like, so if I can just say,
Yeah,
he
take
isn't
it.
my client, but I know who's working with him. He's not my client, but I have met him on several occasions. I did some work on the Invictus Games with him, and I don't know what any of you thinks of Prince Harry, but I found him quite charming, lovely man, and really dedicated to the Invictus team. Particularly, they all love him, and I thought he was a really nice bloke. But no, he's not my client, but I know who is. He's
I
mind
guess he's
blowing.
pretty sad about putting himself in a more difficult situation, particularly with the good work he's been doing on things like that. But
Well, he had a big victory, didn't he, last week? As you know, he
oh,
won
with the
won
Daily
his
Mail,
case,
yeah.
won his case against the press, the Sun, who'd been tapping his phone and the phone of many other people, and won an enormous settlement, which he's given to charity, and good for him.
I was quite surprised he settled out of court, actually. I thought he wanted a bit of an argument in court, but
No, no, I think people will always settle out of court if they can. Nobody really wants that stress, whether they're going to win or not.
hmm.
It's no fun. And of course, the Sun didn't admit any liability at all for the fact they've been tapping people's phones for 20 years. But there you go.
And yeah, I was going to ask you about certain journalists, a very high profile journalist on Twitter that supports Arsenal, but I won't
No,
mention.
don't. Don't ask me to give a view on a fellow journalist, Derek. That's not fair, would it? I've already batted you back about the BBC. Now I'm going to bat you back about that. I've got a National Unionist journalist card in my wallet right here, and I'm loyal to the NUJ. So,
Good for you, Alan. Tell us about what happened to you and I in Melbourne when we sat down for dinner.
oh yes. Are there any Australians in? No. Good. So, we were at what's now called PSA, isn't it? Professional Speakers Australia, they're now called. They used to be called National Speakers Association of Australia, NSAA, once upon a time. And yes, we were both there for their annual conference, Derek, weren't we? And we were both speaking at their conference. And, like you do, we got together in the evening. We all went out for a beer because, everyone likes a beer, and particularly Australians, I've discovered, believe it or not, bit of a shock, like a beer. So we all went to the local bar. There were probably about half a dozen of them with us, weren't there? And we all trooped in, and one of the guys went to the bar and bought all his mates a drink, and we're standing there, drinkless. And one of the guys said to us, "Are you two guys having a drink?" And we said, "Yeah." And they went, "Bar's over there."
And
It
we
wasn't
thought we
exactly
were
International Bonhomie Week, was it?
I know we thought we were guests of the Australians, and we
No,
flew 9,000
no
miles and
way.
paid
No.
our own fees,
Hmm.
and we weren't. And the final thing, Alan, is do you remember when we stood on stage at that charity gala
I
auction?
do, I do, Derek. You stitched me up a treat, didn't
I
you?
did. It was good fun. We didn't really know, we hadn't really prepared it very well, and we didn't know what the prizes were. And I was reading out the prizes for this auction, and Alan was doing the auction, and there was a massage offered. And I thought, well,
Shall I pick up the story here, Derek?
I think you better, Alan.
I better pick up the story. So we were doing this kind of charity auction, and yes, and Derek was handing the cards to me with the next item to be bid for, and and this was a guy, and I knew the guy was a masseur, and what he'd done, he'd offered this, and he was a masseur to the stars. He told us, so he'd had his hands on a lot of people. But he said he was going to auction one of these masseurs, and Derek handed me the card, and the card's got the opening bid on it. And if I remember correctly, Derek, the card you handed me said opening bid £20,000. And I looked at it, I went, what? And you laughed, which was very nice because I'm now stuck with a microphone and having to do something. And I said, well, let's see how high we can get. I think I started it at 200, and he just was furious, wasn't he? Utterly furious.
Yeah, I don't
But
think anyone bought it at 200, did they, from
nobody
memory?
bought it. No, no.
No, no. It's extraordinary what some people do. We were really put on the spot there. But
No, you put me on the spot, Derek. We weren't put on the spot.
Alan, we're just winding up. One last tip for anybody who gets themselves into a little spot of bother with the media, with social media or whatever. What would it be?
My email address is alan@mediacoach.co.uk. My phone number is 07986 852 621. Just give me a call.
Well, there's a surprise, Alan. I didn't think you would have said that. Alan Stevens, thanks for joining Monday Night Live. And would everyone give Alan the usual vote of thanks in the
Thank
normal
you very much indeed. It's been a pleasure and a privilege.
on
Pleasure and a
gallery
privilege.
view? Thanks, Alan. I'm going to stop the recording. Will you stay on and join us for a
Yeah,
little
yeah,
while?
of course. Yeah, yeah, of course.
Thanks very much.